So what I've always tended to do is when I start a new save, I will pick a league and I will assign a manager to every single team in that league. Because it means that whilst I'm going a considerable rate slower because I'm managing a vastly greater number of teams, I basically get to have every possible narrative in one save.
That was the voice of Z, also known as Bad Lip Hotel, in various places such as Twitter or X. And this podcast, welcome to the podcast. This is one of the episodes that I recorded quite some time ago. It's a cracking episode. I just wanted to put that little trail in at the start so you could really get a sense of what we're going to talk about. But because this was recorded a good few months ago now, there's been a little bit of a change since it was recorded. So at the time we were talking about this, Z was streaming Football Manager on Twitch. That's something that he stepped away from now. Still kind of involved a little bit, but moving on to other projects and taking a bit of a break from Twitch. Things have changed a little bit. But we spoke about this episode and the really interesting approach that he has to the game and some of the other life stuff that he has to share in this episode. So we still agreed that it was worth releasing. So without any more further ado, on with the rest of the episode. So, welcome to FM Thoughts, a podcast about Football Manager. And I am JMThoughts, and today I'm joined by Z, also known as Bad Lip Hotel. And I don't actually know why that's the case.
Okay, so it started because starting on a bright note, I basically had a bit of a nervous breakdown about 4 years ago. And I became non-verbal for about 6 months. I just couldn't talk at all. Usually I just have a little bit of a stutter, but I just couldn't get words out at all. And so I started a channel whereby I wrote a video script. I then got somebody else to voice it, and I then lip-synced my own script to them reading my script, and that was called Bad Lip Service. And so Bad Lip sort of became my online tag, and then the hotel bit is just basically every streamer sort of seems to have their group, be it the army, the brigade, whatever. Mine just became the hotel and the hotel residence, basically because I was always more interested in my stream being a location for a community rather than a reflection of me as an individual.
One of the main things I've seen you play is Football Manager. Is that something that you've been doing for a long time, or is that a fairly recent thing?
Yeah, no, So my very, very first football management game was a little remembered game called Premier Manager on the PS1. I think I had the second one, which was Premier Manager 98. It was not particularly good, but as an 8-year-old, I was obsessed. And then my first game of the sort of FM family-ish would have been Championship Manager 2000-2001. I played a little bit of that, was never quite sure if I liked it or not, and then got 01-02 gifted to me the next year. And despite it being ostensibly the same game, there was just something with that one that clicked. And I would say, when I was younger and couldn't afford them, I probably got a new one every 3 or 4 years, and then sort of in adulthood, I'd say have probably gotten sort of most of them since about 2010, maybe skipped two or three.
In terms of how you play the game, has that changed a lot over time?
Uh,
Have you learnt to approach it differently?
I think, yeah, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. I would say the way I play has changed in as much as almost with each FM, even now, I will take it a little bit more seriously, not in terms of, kind of getting angry with it or sort of hell bent on certain parameters, but with in terms of, you know what, this year I'm going to get more involved with doing the training, for instance. Training was something that for a long time I put off and went, oh, it's probably worth it a bit, but I can't really be bothered. And then I think, I sort of getting more involved in the FM community, I was like, okay, actually, training does kind of matter, so I'm gonna focus on that. And the first year it was all very, you know, I'm just gonna click a few buttons, and then sort of with each passing year, I take it a bit more seriously. But the the way I tend to play off stream, uh, I've been told is absolutely insane. But like it's pretty much what I've always done. Is that to me, we all play Football Manager as a kind of simulation of what being a manager is like, and with each sort of club's story, you get a sort of a different narrative. But it does mean that, if you open the game and you go, "Oh, I'm going to manage, I don't know, Liverpool," say, the narrative you're always going to get is one of being a big team and competing for trophies and stuff like that. Equally, if you sort of compete as a much lower to team down the ranks, for a long time at least, it's always going to be about building upwards, etc. Um, so what I've always tended to do is when I start a new save, I will pick a league and I will assign a manager to every single team in that league. Because it means that whilst I'm going a considerable rate slower because I'm managing a vastly greater number of teams, I basically get to have every possible narrative in one save. With one click of continue, I'll be trying to find the world-class striker who'll take a team from, league winners to Champions League contenders. And with the next click, I'll be trying to save the team with the lowest budget in the league from relegation. And to me, it very much would not work for most people because it is slow and it requires patience, and sort of you make very little progress anytime you open the game. But it just, yeah, it allows me to feel like I'm getting all the possible experiences rolled into one, and it keeps my interest a lot better than the occasions where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take X club from the fourth tier to the Champions League. So, yeah, generally, people tell me I'm insane. They kind of understand the logic, but think it's nonsense. I have convinced a couple of people to give it a go, and they've kind of gone, okay, now I get it. Sometimes they go, now I get it, but I don't have the patience. But I think they do at least sort of understand the logic in the end.
Wow. I have so many follow-up questions. That is incredible. And you know what? Like, I from the off, I can kind of get it. I've played a lot of strategy games in my time, like a lot of the Total War games and that kind of thing, and I always used to get really frustrated that you couldn't change or manage multiple factions at once. And the ability to add extra managers in Football Manager. And a game that I've really fallen in love with over the last 6 months is Crusader Kings, where you can literally just be like, hey, I'm going to change who I'm playing as and just move to someone else. So that actually I can kind of buy it. When doing this podcast, I've discovered that there are different people who engage with the game, and there are some people who are really about that world building and that broader narrative, and I guess this is like the logical conclusion of that, is that you are the master of all of the teams in your world. Yeah. And yeah, I find that really fascinating. I mean, my initial question though is, do you not find yourself rooting for some teams over others?
Do you know, I find myself maybe having more of a soft spot for some teams than others, but I will find ways to make sure that, like, I don't unfairly sort of bias them. You know, for instance, like, if teams are of a similar level, I won't poach players from sort of within that level unless it's somebody that, like, I was content to transfer list as one of the managers. Whereas, you know, if it's like one of the big teams, I'll give them license to poach whoever they want because they are one of the big teams. But, like, it's very rarely the big teams that I actually develop sort of the soft spot for. It tends to be the team that has done unexpectedly well and is rising through the ranks that I tend to get a bit of a soft spot for. I'd say, like, I'm never going to be like, oh, Manchester City, how much fun. Like, I enjoy trying to use their budget to see if they can dominate all that's around them, but I'm not going to have the same sort of affection as if I, you know, say, manage to get Burnley sort of into Europe. And also, I think as well, when you're managing every team from one league, the inevitability is some of them have to get sacked. Like, at some point, some of them are not going to do a good job. And so whilst you start in a universe where everyone's there, sometimes some of the managers drop down the divisions. Sometimes some of the managers can only find a job abroad. So it's like you start with 20 teams in one place, and by the end, like at certain points, you'll find that you've actually got managers in 5 or 6 different leagues because either they've dropped divisions or you wanted them to, you know, like if somebody from a big club's been sacked but they can't get a big job in the country you started, you go, okay, well, I'm going to have to sidestep to another country. So, like, it's possible to, like, have multiple favorites without it becoming a problem.
So you keep playing as all of the managers until they
get
sacked, you know, can't get a job or whatever. Wow.
The only times I've ever retired a manager have been if somehow they have done so badly repeatedly that they're basically unemployable. Otherwise, and that, like, it's very hard to make that happen. Like, it's that's a 1 in every, like, 5 saves. So 5 saves probably with 20 managers, maybe 1 in 100. Just something about the way you set the manager up is so bad that, you know, you end up getting sacked in the Conference North going, what the hell is going on? But in general, like, you know, I sort of, and sometimes they drop and you have to work back up with them. You know, I think on, like, FM 17, I had a manager who kept getting sacked, dropped all the way to managing, I think, Exeter City in the conference, and then got Exeter City back up to the championship. Like it's so they all the stocks of the different managers can go up and down, and it gives me a more rounded experience.
And presumably because you can, when you're playing as hot seat managers, you can manage against each other. Are you I guess when they're playing each other, you are managing both teams at the same time, making the changes?
So generally, my policy to make sure that like I don't have an inherent bias if I'm managing like if it's two human teams, is I will set the team up in a way tactically that I'm happy for them to stay the whole game, and I will just make substitutions, and I will only sort of change things tactically if there's something like an injury or a red card. Generally, I will try and make that like a more organic thing. Whereas if it's a human team versus an AI team, I will manage it straight.
You must get a sense each FM then of which tactics tend to work, right? Presumably there's like a sifting thing here where if you're trying different tactics and trying to match the philosophy of the clubs and all of this, you will get a sense of, well, 4-4-2 is working really, really well this year, or a back five is working really well this year. Is that fair to say?
I think it certainly helps. I think the flip of that is that quite often I will start a new save like this on a new FM, and then if something just doesn't quite grab me about it, I will quite often sort of be like, okay, well this is now becoming like the version of FM I stream from because it's the new one, but I'm going to go back. And so quite often it will take me like a few years to get off a specific version that I play off stream. So like my off stream save at the moment is still primarily on FM21. That's my preferred sort of universe at the moment. But like I do have a save like it on 24. And yes, you do kind of learn that certain tactics, or it doesn't even tend to necessarily be the shapes, it more tends to be the instructions. Like you'll kind of go, okay, so the top six is currently looking a bit weird, so what do those teams have in common? And if you look at their tactics and you go, well, five of them have this instruction, I'm going to stick this instruction on a couple more and see if they start, going up the table. So yeah, there is a degree of that, but I would also say that, I tend to find that like my experimentation with really weird stuff tends to be more in like PvP for my own entertainment. So I would say I'd definitely learn through it what some of the best, in inverted commas, standard tactics are, but it doesn't necessarily teach me that, sort of an strikerless asymmetric 5-4-1 is, like I'm not going to be using any of those with those teams. I'm just trying to see whether a 4-4-2 beats a 4-2-3-1, and whether a 5-3-2 beats a 5-2-1-2 narrow.
Do you have an answer for that?
Depends on the game cycle. For this one, I definitely think that the four at the back seems stronger than the five at the back this year. There's only been a couple of five at the backs that I've managed to sort of trial that seem particularly good against standard four at the back, and they tend to have to be set up quite specifically. Whereas plugging in a back four, a 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, you're going to be in the game more often than not.
That makes sense. It kind of reflects real football on some level as well, doesn't it? So, maybe not. Go on.
Well, I was going to say that I think it probably is less of a reflection of real football than it plays out as in the game. In that, to me, it does almost feel like, if a certain formation would work 9 times out of 10 on FM, if you actually put it into sort of real football, it's as much about how well those players are drilled at it. I think, there are far more surprising outcomes in actual football than there are in FM for me. And I think that makes sense because FM is computerized, but it does feel more linear. I don't, if one of the bottom teams in the Premier League, say, go and play Man City, I think if they drill down and go, okay, we're going to make every training session about this point, and if they're really well drilled, they will get a result more often than if you tried to do the same thing on FM. So I think you're right that it is a reflection. I think it is probably an overinflated correlation. In my opinion, others may disagree.
This is a cheeky question, but it really makes me wonder. Are you an only child?
No, I'm not. But from the point of view that you're asking it, there probably is a degree of truth in it. I'm not an only child, but both my brothers are considerably younger than me. So, in terms of having to entertain myself, which I am assuming is where you're going with it, there probably was a degree of that. Not fully, because obviously I did play with my brothers, and on a lot of occasions ended up having to look after my brothers when sort of parents were busy. But there definitely was a degree of I couldn't really game with my brothers because sort of they were at a very different age, and then by the time they did get into games, for my brothers it was all FIFA and Call of Duty, and I've not played a FIFA since 2011, I don't think, and shooty games just aren't for me. There's too much violence and misery in the world already without me wanting to shoot people in the head for fun.
There is a handful of shooting games that I have a soft spot for, but that sentiment does ring true with me. I'm actually an only child, and I remember playing a lot of games where I'd make up the rules, and you end up playing as all the different characters, racing cars across the living room, but you're controlling all the cars and seeing who wins. And there's definitely an element to that. I think that's kind of why, as I say, I genuinely kind of really get an appeal of this idea of playing as all of the teams and seeing how it works, because it is it's quite good. At risk of changing this topic radically, can we talk about Countdown?
Yeah, of course. Not a problem.
Tell me about Countdown.
Okay, so Countdown was one of the first TV shows I can ever remember watching as a kid. It was how I learnt my letters and numbers and stuff like that. And, I would watch it almost every day as like a sort of 3, 4 year old, and that turned into actually understanding the rules and starting to try and play it as like a 5 year old. And obviously, like as a 5 year old, you're playing it and you're going, okay, I can find cat and dog and stuff like that. And the numbers were a bit harder because unless they were, you know, really low, you were probably more likely to just be trying to add or subtract than multiply a load of things. So it's something I've always had a soft spot for. And then obviously when you hit teenage years, all of a sudden Countdown becomes uncool, and like I didn't watch it for years. And then I'm gonna say it was 20, it was either 2011 or 2012. Uh, I basically I wasn't in a particularly good place. Um, I just I'd just been through the breakup of a relationship. It was at a point where probably sort of if if people are listening to this who don't know me, I've been very open that I'm a former drug addict, and so we're talking at the time where I was probably near the height of my addiction, and it was also not too long after I sort of was consigned to a wheelchair permanently, and so we're talking about, a very rough, bitter, angry, self-destructive period. And I just lay there and I went, I need something to keep my mind occupied. I need just something that, however trivial, I can focus on. And I happened to turn on the TV and Countdown was on. And I kind of went, I used to love this show. And so I watched Countdown and I was trying to play along. And, I was doing reasonably okay by the standard of the average person sitting on the couch. And then after watching an episode, I went, I wonder if there's a place to play this online. And there is. There's a very good website called apterus.org. Shout out to Charlie, who runs that. And so I started playing online. And to start with, I was basically the assessment from the people who'd been on the site for a long time was that I was a damn sight better than the average person who started on the site, but equally I was still getting my ass handed to me by most of them. But they said, we reckon you've probably got something, so keep at it. So I kept practicing, and I got into. I basically, all of them were trying to go, you should apply for the show, you should apply for the show. And I said, I'll apply for the show when I make the top 50 in the world. And I made the top 50 in the world, and so I applied for the first time. This was 2013. So I applied, I went on the show, I won 5 games, and then I got beaten by somebody who ended up coming up runner-up in that series, and also went on to become one of the Champion of Champions, because the Champion of Champions seasons also invite back people who weren't necessarily champions, just very high-scoring players. But yeah, so I thought that was me and like TV Countdown done with, but like I had the bug enough that I stayed on the website. I also, similarly to like, with FM Twitch, always find a way to give back to a community. I started running like my own, basically like pub version of Countdown, like people would to turn up in a bar and we'd all play Countdown for the day. I wasn't the first person to do it, but what I did with it was set up basically almost like a tour is the best way I can describe it, where basically all the events results counted towards one big rankings, and there was a big like end of year finals / Christmas party where sort of like the top players would play to be like the best player of the year, but also everybody else who was involved also had their own tournament to try and win. So yeah, still very much in the community. And then I think 2018, I got a message from the executive producer of the show, a lovely guy called Damien, who, like, he was a proper Countdown nut, so he used to play on this site as well when he wasn't working on the show. And he went, look, you got a pretty rough draw your first time round, you've improved a lot, would you like another go at the show? And I went, okay, fine, let's do it, but with a lot of trepidation because, the first time was almost like a free swing for me. The second time I was like, people now have an expectation, at least within this community. But yeah, went back on the TV, won the series. The next year, there was a Champion of Champions, was invited back for that, ended up winning that as well. So yeah, like Countdown was a really big part of my life, and I actually don't. I think it was big part in helping me to come to terms with my disability, because I suddenly had a community again who hadn't known me before but still accepted me. Whereas before that, it was always communities who had kind of already known me, and so there was almost like, in some quarters, this reluctant acceptance of me. It was like, oh, well, now organising stuff with him is a pain in the arse because he's disabled, but he was already here. And I also think it definitely played a big part in giving me a focus when I decided to get clean off drugs in 2013. So yeah, Countdown holds a big place in my heart. The tour I set up, whilst I'm no longer involved, it still runs very successfully to this day. I have friends I made through it who are still involved with running it, even though I'm not really sort of part of the community as much anymore. And it helped that I happened to be reasonably good at it and sort of end up being on TV for something like, I want to say 21 episodes because of it, something like that. So yeah, I realised that was a very long ramble. I apologise because I know this isn't the longest podcast, but that's the history of me and Countdown.
That's a great story, and thank you very much for sharing it. And it's definitely worth a slight overrun of our usual length to add that in. My final kind of, I guess, and this could be a short answer, it could just be no, but as someone who's an expert on Countdown and has played a lot of Football Manager, is there any commonality? Does it give you any advantage in PvP Football Manager, or does your Football Manager give you advantage in Countdown, or are they two quite separate things?
I think there is a commonality in terms of analysis. I would say both FM and Countdown, you are analyzing. Obviously in Countdown it's a very quick analysis. You're looking for combinations of letters that you've seen before. You're trying to sort of unscramble for different endings. You're multiplying numbers that you know will get you into the vicinity of an answer and trying to work from there. FM is a lot slower, but it's still often about trying to solve a problem. In terms of PvP, I actually think it helps a lot, because one of the things I became known for within Countdown was that, in general, I was always incredibly calm and sort of tried to stay friendly, would always try and chat with my opponents, make them feel at ease. And I think that does translate across to PvP, because a lot of people don't know how to channel their nerves. And I think that sometimes it can just lead to people who get upset with their own performance. And there are a few occasions where, unfortunately, I think it can lead to a slightly more toxic sort of aggression when things don't go people's way. Whereas for me, I just kind of go, well, look, you know, you've been watched by hundreds of thousands of people on TV, in a TV studio, doing something at speed, and you stayed calm there through a variety of techniques. FM, just apply the same principles, always try and stay calm. If somebody's being excessively competitive and aggressive with you, just let them. Maybe try and de-escalate if you think they're going too far. But in general, just focus on your own thing, stay calm. It may not be the most brilliant viewing. I will openly admit I am not ever going to be the biggest box office draw for a PvP competition, because I do tend to stay very calm. But you know, there definitely is a crossover. As small as it may seem on paper.
Fascinating. I love that. I feel like I could continue to ask questions for the next hour, but we are very much out of time.
Not a problem. With my pleasure.
So I hope you, like me, found that a very interesting episode in terms of a life story and an approach to Football Manager the game, which is what this podcast is about. That's why I made it. Thank you for listening to the podcast and getting to this point. I'm sorry, season 2 is a little bit messy. A little bit of kind of breaking the fourth wall. I don't think that's the right word, but a little bit of personal information. I've gone through a change of jobs. As part of that, I'm also doing a qualification. I've got some essays due in. So unfortunately, with all of that, the podcast is not really on a regular schedule, which is really, really hurting the listenership. Of course, because that's how things work. So if you did enjoy this podcast and you did know somebody who might find it interesting, or maybe has listened in the past, it's worth just sharing it. Please pass it on and just let them know that it exists. It really helps. And I'm hoping that season 2 will be a little bit messy, but hopefully we'll come back to a bit more of a schedule soon, back to kind of those sort of weekly or fortnightly episodes. And then season 3, when life has settled down, will be much more smooth, I guess. I don't know. The long story short is, thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for listening. And if you've got any thoughts on the podcast, it's at JMThoughts FM on Twitter or Twitch.tv. All the links are down there. Come and find me, talk about it. I want to hear your approaches to Football Manager. And until next time, have a good week. Go well, my friends. Go well.